Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of the Journey Running Podcast, where the goal is to help you run farther, fuel smarter, and develop character through trail and ultra running. I am your host, Registered Dietitian, Coach, and ultrarunner Stefan Schuster. As always, I'd like to use this moment as a reminder to folks that Journey Running is much more than just a podcast. It is also my running and nutrition coaching business. So if you or anyone you know is looking for a coach or to work with a registered dietitian, you can reach out to me on my website, journeyruncoaching.com, or directly via email at journeyrunningsllc@gmail.com. Also, it would really mean the world to me if you could take a quick moment to rate, subscribe, and review the show. You can also leave comments on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify. These actions, although they only take a moment of your time, they go a really long way in helping the show increase its engagement, which, then means that more people will be able to listen to the show when it's recommended to them. Just getting more eyes and ears on the show. It is a goal of mine, but also it's because I'm trying to provide as much value as I can to you guys as listeners. So, I really do appreciate it. This is another episode where I feel like the great takeaway, there's a lot of great takeaways for folks who are listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did recording it. With that said, I got a few more show notes for the week. Let's see, things going on in the ultra world. It would be remiss of me to not mention the Burrito League that has been going on. It's been a ton of fun. If there's a chapter near you, you still have time to participate as I record this on Friday, January 23rd, running 0.2 mile segments. I'll be honest, I thought it was kind of dumb at first, but I showed up on day one and I got sucked in when, the whole community came out, and, for the last 2 weeks now, I've been logging all my runs on the 0.2 mile segment outside of Runner's Roost in Boulder. And, at first I came here to win burritos, but I stayed for the friends that I made along the way. There's been a really great group of like 5 to 10 of us who've been showing up every single day. And it feels like no matter what time you head over to the Roost, there's always people running laps outside. And it's been a great experience. It actually inspired me to sign up for my first Loop Ultra, so I'll be running the Jackpot 100 next month in Las Vegas. I'm really excited, doing it for kind of a few reasons, actually. Number one, I'm interested in seeing what I could do on a flat loop course in terms of time. I've never run like a really flat 100 before. Everything I've done is mountains, like my 100-mile PR is at Western States, which is a really cool thing to, I guess, brag about, but like, it's not the fastest course out there, so I'm excited to see what I could do on like flat terrain on like a loop course, either something like Jackpot or a rail to trail kind of race like Prairie Spirit or Tunnel Hill in like Kansas or Illinois. Those are really like the kind of races where you can throw down a fast 100-mile PR. So I'm really excited for that. Also, I'm super excited because, I'm going to try and shoot for, I think it's sub 20. I'm going to shoot for sub 20, but sub 21 or sub 22 gives you preference in the Spartathlon application, and I do want to apply to that race in the next few years. So that is an ulterior motive. And then the other motive is just I have a goal of running an ultra, preferably a 100 miler in all 50 states. So this will check off Nevada for me. So it'd be kind of cool. And, I've, like I said, never done a loop race. I've been really enjoying the community at the Roost doing the Burrito League here in Boulder. So I'm excited to make some more friends on the loop at Jackpot. All right. Yeah. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode. In this episode, I have on my good friend, registered dietitian, Alyssa Lieb. We talk a lot about the importance of meeting energy needs as athletes in this episode, as well as the repercussions of not doing so. We talk about fueling for long runs and races, including hydration and electrolytes. We touch on nutrition for female athletes, the new food pyramid, and of course, we talk a little bit more about the notorious Burrito League. Overall, this was a great episode, and I'm super excited to share it with everyone. So without further ado, let's welcome Elisa to the show. All right, so I'm here with Alyssa Lieb, a registered dietitian, the owner of Peak to Peak Nutrition. Elisa is also an avid ultrarunner, a climber, a skier. I might be biased in saying this, but I do think that the best coaches, dietitians, physical therapists, etc., I think are really the best ones are the ones who have a mixture of practical experience as an athlete, but also, respective knowledge in their field. So I'm super excited to have you on, Elisa, because you're one of those few individuals who has that great combination of both. I'd love to hand the mic over to you to introduce yourself, tell us any fun facts about yourself, where you're from, what was your journey to becoming a dietitian, becoming an endurance athlete, whatever else you want to share, really.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. This is like kind of a fun full circle moment. I feel like I need to share with our listeners that I met Stefan during his dietetic internship. He was my intern, which is very fun. So yeah,
Yes.
stoked to be here having this conversation with you. Background. So I live in Golden, Colorado. I grew up in Southern Appalachia and Southwestern Virginia. And so my journey to mountain sports, endurance sports was just kind of like natural. Grew up in kind of like a hiking, biking family. I played soccer growing up, other than like 2 years that I joined the middle school track team because I really wanted a jacket. That was really cool for me. But other than that, really like didn't do much specific running until I got to college and no longer had soccer and was just kind of like lost as an athlete. Wasn't really sure what to do. So started running. It was all kind of road running at that point. I went to school in central North Carolina. There like are some trails there, but there's not mountains for sure. And it was fun. Like I like pretty instantly fell in love with it. Had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Like made all of the mistakes that, new runners make, like including I signed up for a half marathon without figuring anything out, like realized that I was going to be studying abroad for the entire summer before the race and like basically spent my summer eating empanadas and dulce de leche in Argentina and not running at all. And then came back and was like, oh, I have 5 weeks until this half marathon. Like, I guess I'll train. And, like, it did not go well. Well, it went fine, but like in retrospect, I'm like, mistakes were definitely made. Yeah, so my kind of journey from there was sort of all over the place. Like my journey towards like trail running was really like pretty closely aligned with my journey towards becoming a dietitian. Kind of like you, Stefan, like as you know, this is my second career. So it really took this weird series of events where I got a bone stress injury, couldn't run for 5 years, had a career crisis and, basically was trying to figure out like, what do I actually want to do with the rest of my life? And, started to realize that, the like prevalence of eating disorders and disordered eating and just like bad nutrition and underfueling in the running community and in like the other outdoors communities that I was a part of was just so high. And I really wanted to, because of my personal experience, I really wanted to sort of add that professional piece that you had mentioned to be able to, kind of help other runners, climbers, skiers, mountaineers not make the same mistakes that I had made, and really just be able to fuel their adventures so that they could perform well, feel good, not break their bodies in the process, all of those things. So yeah, started the very, very long journey of going back to school, taking science classes for the first time since 11th grade. And yeah, went through the very extensive process that it now is to become a dietitian, which has been like the best choice I could have made for myself, for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I put out a whole episode on how to become a dietitian just because it was partially a mix of I wanted people who are considering becoming a dietitian to have like a clear understanding of everything that it takes, but I also wanted to put it out there to let athletes who are considering hiring a dietitian know that we have to go as practitioners through a lot of hoops. Obviously we need our master's degree is required now, the 1,000 hours of being a dietetic intern, which is essentially a nutrition residency. I always feel like the word intern is kind of like degrading for like, it just doesn't really live up to what we actually have to do.
I totally agree.
We have to take our exam. Yeah. We have rotations. My first rotation was actually, like you said, it was with you. Back then you were with the YMCA, so that was one of my community rotations. And then I was with, I did most of mine at the VA. But it's a process, and we do a lot of work to make sure that we're reliable and trustworthy, and like know what we're doing when we're working with people.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was looking at your website before we're recording just to come up with a few questions for you, and one of the first things that your website says is that you are the anti-diet dietitian, and today, one of the big topics that we're going to be talking about is adequate fueling, because I know that's something you're super passionate about, and you already alluded to it. But I was wondering, what does being the anti-diet dietitian mean to you?
Yeah, so anti-diet is kind of I don't know, like a placeholder for like a whole lot of different things that it also can mean. And I'm probably not going to do any justice to any of these movements by describing it. But the very short of it is that I am anti-diet. When you work with me, I'm not going to put you on a diet. As part of that, I practice through a weight inclusive lens. So what that means is that we, when working together, we don't focus on weight as a measure of health, as a measure of performance, as anything, because we have so much research that shows that having this very like weight-centric approach to nutrition and healthcare can actually cause a lot more harm than good, both in terms of mental health. So we know that dieting is actually one of the strongest predictors of developing an eating disorder. But we also know that, most people who diet end up weight cycling or yo-yo dieting. So, and I think this is probably like very familiar to a lot of people listening. Like you go on a diet to lose weight, you lose some weight, your life circumstance changes, you regain the weight, and then you go on another diet to lose the weight again. And we know that that kind of weight cycling actually wreaks havoc on your metabolism. So it is not actually good for you physically, as well as mentally. So my approach to nutrition basically just sort of, I don't want to say takes weight out of the picture, but it really focuses more on like habits and lifestyle changes and, things that we actually have direct control over that we know have a strong influence on our health and our performance.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting though, because a lot of people, and I'm sure being a dietitian in the sports nutrition field, like I imagine a lot of people come to you with aspirations of trying to lose weight. Or what do you say to them? Yeah, what do you say to those individuals?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, and like I always want people to feel like their desire to lose weight is not wrong. I can think of 80,000 totally valid reasons why, living in 2026 as a runner or not, why you would want to lose weight. And those are totally valid reasons, and like that's completely fine. I think a lot of clients who reach out to me sort of like resonate with my approach. And so I actually like surprisingly don't get that many people who reach out with weight loss as a goal. I have a lot of people who reach out who, they've struggled with like having this desire to lose weight, and they've sort of reached a point where like they're recognizing that it's not necessarily serving them and they're sort of ready for something else. When I do have someone who isn't maybe quite ready for that change yet, or doesn't realize that, maybe they are ready for that change, I'll normally just start with a broader conversation to really try to get to the bottom of like, okay, I hear you have this goal of weight loss. Like, where does that come from? Does it come from aesthetic reasons because we realistically like live in a very fat phobic society with a great deal of weight bias, and, people who are in bigger bodies are discriminated against. They don't get as good of healthcare. They, are not, they're often passed up for job opportunities. Like it's like a genuine form of discrimination, and as well as just sort of social stigma. And so, at the end of the day, like, does your desire to lose weight really stem from a desire to fit in, to, feel good about yourself? And, so a lot of what we do at the beginning is just trying to get to the bottom of like, where does this goal come from? And can we achieve that goal, through some other means? So, I think really commonly, I always hear, well, like I want to lose weight so that my joints feel healthier, so that I feel stronger and don't get injured as much doing my sport. So, then that becomes a conversation of like, okay, well, some other ways that you can support your joint health would be making sure that you're eating enough, which I know we're going to talk about a lot more. Maybe working with a physical therapist, working with a running coach so that, your training is appropriate for the load that your body can handle, strength training, building muscle, those sorts of things. So and I do have people who they say, hey, like I appreciate that, I respect that, like I still just want to lose weight, and in those cases I'll often refer out to somebody else, and like that's totally fine, no harm done. But yeah, it is like an interesting conversation, because I think a lot of people don't always realize from the beginning like where that goal stems from and what the kind of deeper purpose is for them.
Yeah, it's funny. We're kind of jumping ahead to some questions I had down the line, but I feel like a good chunk of people who have come to me for coaching / nutrition services are interested in the subject of weight loss, and while they're trying to train for an ultra, which are two very what's the word I'm looking for? They're two goals that really just clash with each other because on one hand you need to meet your energy needs for training, because if you don't, then your body's going to look elsewhere. And if it looks elsewhere, then it looks at it could look at your fat loss. You might lose some fat that way. But more importantly, there's a good chance you're going to lose some lean muscle mass. And eventually over time that could lead to something like a stress fracture, which is really what you don't want. Which is why, if I'm coaching anyone who has weight loss as a goal, I try my best to minimize any sort of intensity or stress on the body that we can. No speed workouts, no crazy hill or high VO2 max activities. It's 100% aerobic volume is what ideally we're going to be focusing on. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your nutrition journey before we get to some of those questions once again down the line here, because one of the really fun things about following you this last year was that, I saw your mileage this year increase to the most that it's ever been, and you were posting a lot on Instagram. It was really fun following your running, but also your nutrition journey, right? And your fueling journey. And I remember you posting about how hungry you were and how much you were eating to fuel your own endeavors. And I was wondering, what did that experience teach you about fueling adequately for yourself? And what kind of changes, even as a dietitian, did you make to make sure you were meeting your needs?
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate that you read what I post on Instagram. It always kind of feels like I'm shouting into the void. Yeah, this was a really cool year for me because, like I kind of mentioned in the beginning, I got a bone stress injury in 2014 and literally did not run for 5 years after that. My injury was wildly misdiagnosed. And, for a very long time, I just thought, okay, I'll probably never run again. And then basically around the time the pandemic hit, gyms closed, we were all just sort of supposed to stay in our neighborhood. I was like, okay, well, my foot hasn't healed at this point, so maybe I'll just go run and see if it doesn't make it worse. And so that was when I really started getting back into running again. So yeah, 2020. And it really wasn't until this past year that I felt confident enough in my recovery from that injury that I felt like I could actually start to push a little bit. So, I was running 5 days a week last year, which is, more than I'd done since I'd gotten the injury. That felt really good. I peaked at about 60 miles a week, which I know for, you certainly, and a lot of your listeners probably, or anyone who, does longer ultras, 60 miles a week doesn't probably seem like that much, but that was a huge increase for me. And yeah, you're totally right. I had to be super intentional about making sure that I was eating enough to meet my needs. One thing that I share with a lot of athletes I work with, so I work a lot with intuitive eating, so basically listening to body's signals to help you understand how much, what, when to eat, those kinds of things. And something I share with all of my athletes is that as an athlete, your fullness cues are not a reliable indicator that you've eaten enough. You will always find situations where even if you are not hungry, in order to fuel your body adequately, you have to eat. I think the primo example of that is you've come back from a long run in the heat during the summer. And, you're a little bit nauseous, maybe you got a little dehydrated on that run, and the last thing you want to do is eat a meal. But that's also a prime opportunity for recovery. So if you don't eat after a long run, you're risking, your muscles not recovering well, your connective tissue not recovering well. You're going to feel terrible for your next long run that you have to do again tomorrow. So that's very much one of those situations where okay, you're not hungry, but you have to eat anyway. So that was definitely my experience all last year. It was okay, we have to be very, very intentional around just making sure that I'm eating consistently, even if I'm not hungry. And then listening out for more of those kind of longer term body cues. Am I performing as I would expect to? How am I recovering? How are my energy levels? And making adjustments in my nutrition based on that kind of feedback.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up intuitive eating because most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, it's a super reliable and healthy way of like making sure that you're portion sizing appropriately. But, you know, and I know you do a lot of backpacking yourself too. I remember when I was on like the Colorado Trail a few years ago, and I would finish, you know, I was doing like 25, 30 miles a day. And sometimes you're just so tired that you set up your tent at night and you just want to like crawl in and go to sleep without eating. And it's surprising how sometimes you can exercise so much and your body's like so tired it just wants to sleep instead of actually refuel with calories and protein and all that other good stuff. But you know, sometimes, like, one of the things that experience taught me is that you have to, you're responsible for taking care of yourself. When you're in the middle of the woods, nobody's going to, like, force you to eat. And that's really carried over to my training regimen over the last few years where, you know, I know that, like, if I get a long run in, like, or if I run a race, like, we're not going to sleep until we get something in our body. And, you know, that goes even for, like, multi-day distance races. Like if somebody's running the Moab 240, like, and you're at an aid station before going to bed, like you better have a hamburger before you go to sleep. Otherwise, like that's a missed opportunity to recover for, you know, even if you're just going to sleep in your car for 2 hours before heading out again. It's super important to know how to take care of yourself because knowledge sometimes is more important than whatever your intuition says.
100%, yeah. And I think that's like one of the biggest misconceptions with intuitive eating as a framework is that like it's just the hunger fullness diet. And the reality is it's really like the marrying of listening to your body, but also applying the wisdom that you have, whether it's like from sports nutrition knowledge or just from like experience, right? Like, oh, I didn't eat before I went to bed last night for 2 hours at Moab 240, and then I woke up and I felt really terrible. So before I go to bed tonight, I'm going to make sure that I eat a meal.
And sometimes it sucks. Like, sometimes my pacers are like, Stefan, you have to eat a cheeseburger before you go to sleep. And I'm like, I don't want to. And they're like, well, you have to. And that's just what you have to do. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do instead of what you want to do. But yeah, no, I'm happy that, you know, we've gone for a few runs and like we've kept in contact since you were my preceptor in my internship, which is pretty cool. You know, and you've told me a little bit about your story of like having that bone stress injury. I was wondering, cause this is a topic you're obviously very like knowledgeable and passionate about. I was wondering if you could really break down the pathology of like, how does that happen over time if athletes are under-fueling?
Yeah. So when you are not eating enough, your body will start to slow down processes that it deems non-essential, which like I put non-essential in air quotes there just because it's kind of funny because if you think about what that means, like they're all processes that I would think are pretty damn essential. So, you know, like some examples would be people who are not eating enough or under-fueling tend to have lower resting heart rates. That I could talk about a lot separately because, you know, like how do you separate, like, well, is it just an athlete's heart or is it a starving heart? But, you know, like that's one of those things where I'm like, well, I would think that like heart rate would be pretty damn essential. But, you know, basically the idea is like your body is sort of cutting the fat for everything that isn't required to sustain life. So if your heart is still beating a little bit, but it's slower, you're still sustaining your life. Other things that can happen when we're not eating enough, your body starts to pull energy away from thermoregulation. So, you know, you struggle to keep warm. You know, often you'll see people who are struggling with underfueling feel cold all the time. It starts to pull energy away from hormone production. So we start to see T3 thyroid hormone will start to tank. And there's a whole number of different like ways that this can show up in the body. But in the context of bone stress injuries, one of those things is your body stops putting energy into building up stronger bones and actually will start breaking down bones and, you know, kind of pulling minerals out of bones to use in other places in your body. And that's a very simplified version of that for sure, but that's essentially what's happening. So when you're not eating enough over an extended period of time, your bones go from being this like really strong kind of like crystalline lattice matrix kind of thing to almost like a sponge. Like if you can look up pictures, and I would encourage anyone who is kind of curious about this to just Google like a healthy bone versus a bone with osteoporosis. And you see like the osteoporotic bone has these like giant gaps in it. And, you know, you can think about like basically anything structural. If you put a bunch of holes in it and turn it into Swiss cheese, it doesn't hold up very well. So over time, you know, you keep running in that kind of situation and your bones are eventually going to get some degree of stress, whether it's more of a kind of lower grade stress reaction, a full stress fracture, or, you know, in really extreme cases, we can see a full fracture come just from, you know, resulting from underfueling.
Right. So is there any way that people can in a healthy way, lose weight without, you know, and still prevent that from happening? Because it's like a sponge. I'm thinking of like a sponge. You said Swiss cheese. I'm thinking of like a sponge that just has like more holes. But I mean, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. You know, and I don't...
Sorry, I didn't give this one to you before we started recording, so sorry to throw it on you.
No, that's okay. I think it's like almost more of like a philosophical question than anything else, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, I think like, because the bigger question is like, you know, is there a way to lose weight safely, full stop? And, you know, we can kind of argue about that one, but, you know, if we assume that the answer to that is yes, then, you know, we can kind of go on to like, is there a way to safely lose weight as an ultra runner and avoid these kinds of bone issues? And, you know, and I would say in that case, like, if you are continuing to train at all while you are in a caloric deficit, like, you are putting your bones at risk. You know, I think there are ways that we can minimize that risk. So like you said, really just focusing on periodization. So, okay, we're going to have this period where, you know, maybe we are going to emphasize the caloric deficit, and we're going to, you know, really pull back on any kind of intensity. We're going to cut back on volume. And then, you know, when you're really training and building and pushing hard, that's where we really want to just make sure that we're, you know, emphasizing adequate energy intake. So
I think that was the perfect answer, though. It is all about risk mitigation, because like you said, there's always a risk. That's also my opinion. You know, I have thoughts on this too, but, you know, people come to me and my thought process is, you know, if I'm being honest, I'm like, this is not a great idea to try and lose weight while you're training for a race. But, you know, at the end of the day, most people are going to do what they're going to do anyway. And I would much rather them work with me and do it safely, or as safely as they can, than do it alone. Because if you're trying to train for an event and if you're actually putting in like a lot of miles, I know a lot of ultra runners, maybe, you know, some people show up undertrained, and that's okay too. But like, if you're really putting in your miles, if you're training for an event, you're doing long runs, you're like doing all this stuff, there's going to be a risk if you're underfueling on purpose or not on purpose. And it comes down to risk mitigation. I think that's like the best way that this question can be answered.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your input.
I think you're spot on with that. And I know this is a conversation we've had before, and I definitely have always kind of appreciated your take on that too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you know, one of the reasons I asked you about like meeting energy needs is because I tell my athletes this all the time. The worst thing you can do for yourself as an athlete is not meet your needs. But I want them to hear it from another RD who's not me.
It's funny because I feel like I have this conversation a lot with athletes, and it's, you know, it's often the ones who are, you know, concerned about, like, often by the time I work with someone, it's because they're starting to notice those, you know, detrimental outcomes of underfueling. So whether it is somebody who, you know, has already had a stress fracture, or they're just noticing like low energy fatigue, performance is struggling, that kind of thing. Like, often by the time I work with an athlete, it's because they're already struggling, which, you know, plug to like, please work on your nutrition before you get to that point. You know, and often, you know, what I see all the time is there's a, you know, concern around whether it's a fear of weight gain or whether it's a fear of like poor health. There's often fear of eating more calories, and specifically eating more carbs. And then even more specifically than that, eating more sugar. So, you know, for example, like during runs, I get a lot of pushback from people who, you know, are almost afraid of taking gels because of, you know, these kind of like societal norms we have around, oh, sugar is bad for you. And so the conversation that we end up having a lot of the time is like, I don't think running 100 miles is good for you either, but, you know, you're going to do it anyway. And so what we want to make sure is that we're doing everything we can to support your body through that. And so in that way, like eating enough carbs, eating enough during your runs, like that is health promoting, because, you know, you're doing this thing that is very hard on your body. And so we want to make sure that it has as much support as possible so that you don't then fall into the stress fractures and the other, you know, aspects with REDs.
Yeah, and we've been talking a lot about, I guess we could put it into the category of lifestyle fueling. And I do want to talk in a moment about fueling during exercise. Before we go there, one big question I have for you is, you know, you said that it took you like 5 years to recover from that bone stress injury. That's a long time. I imagine there is some stress, anxiety, that, or I'm not sure how many years you are past the recovery point now, a few years at least it sounds like. I imagine there's some anxiety about something like that coming back. Do you have any nutritional recommendations for people to maintain strong bones or prevent a stress fracture in the future if they're worried about, a recurring one in the past coming back? What advice do you have for people on like that note?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually talking with a client right before we met to record this about that kind of like fear of the injury coming back. And I think that's something that, a lot of people who have experienced bone stress injuries specifically, but also just any kind of long-term injury can definitely relate to, because I think, maybe someone out there is a mental health professional and can kind of like confirm this, but in my opinion, that kind of injury is almost like a trauma. And that doesn't go away. And I know for me, like I said, last year was really the first time since 2014 that I wasn't just constantly worried that someone was going to jump out of the bushes and be like, psych, you're injured again. Like, hope you enjoyed running while you had it. It's gone. Yeah, it's a very real thing. Nutritionally, like we could talk for like a whole hour about like specific, nutrition strategies for bone health. I will say like the absolute most important thing that you can do to protect your bones is eat enough calories. Low energy availability is very strongly correlated with bone stress injuries. And so if you are not eating enough calories, basically nothing else matters. Like I see this all the time. Like somebody gets a bone stress injury, they get a DEXA scan, and then they find out they have osteopenia or osteoporosis. And their doctor says, take this calcium supplement, take this vitamin D supplement, but doesn't say anything about their caloric intake. When, yes, we need calcium, we need vitamin D, but if you're not eating enough calories, like I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's, because we've brought it up so much, I'm actually pulling up a website here just to help people understand what their energy needs are. I don't know about you, but I like to use Harris-Benedict equation. It's a nutrition equation for anyone listening to try and calculate like how much you need. If you go to a website called omnicalculator.com, I think that's like a good public resource people can use to try and estimate what they need on a daily basis, and you can also enter how physically active you are in there, as it's called a physical or like a stress factor, to because if people who exercise more obviously need more calories and more protein, etc., compared to people who are sedentary. So I just wanted to throw that as a resource out there because we've hit on this topic so many times, but it's also amazing how just the simplest thing, just like meeting your needs, and your body's energy is measured in calories. I know calories and counting that kind of stuff can be triggering for some people. So, I would say to work with a professional, because we're not going to be able to cover everything in this conversation today, but, you can work with Elisa, myself, someone else, to try and find ways to meet your energy needs without calorie counting if that's something you don't want to do too. But if you're okay with numbers, I just wanted to throw that as a resource out there because in my experience, it seems to be somewhat, I would say it's like mostly accurate in just like giving people a range.
Yeah, absolutely.
On like a daily basis.
I'm like actually constantly shocked by how accurate these numbers are. Because I know that like these kinds of estimates I see anyway get kind of like a lot of flack in like social media of like, oh, like, it's just an estimate, which it is. Everyone is different. Yeah. But I've had a handful of clients who have gotten resting metabolic rate testing, and like it's always fun to just compare the numbers that they get from that actual lab test that is specific to them to what Harris-Benedict or Mifflin St. Jeor, like whatever, predictive equation you want to use, estimates. And they're like, I had a client do that earlier this year, and I just out of curiosity compared her RMR from that test with her estimated RMR from like 5 different predictive equations, and they were all within 25 calories of each other. Like,
oh wow,
shockingly
that's precise.
Accurate.
Another interesting way I like to do with people is like if you take your, most people need just on average, because like the American guidelines are based off of like a 2,000 calorie diet, but like let's say you're running 70 miles a week and like you're burning 100 calories a mile, that comes out to an extra 1,000 calories per day that you need that you're burning. So then you probably need about 3,000 calories. That's another like not super precise way, but like I like to do multiple equations when I'm trying to figure out someone's energy expenditure, just because everyone is so different. And I like to, like you said, compare and contrast them to just see, what is like the minimum in their range and the maximum depending on the equation.
Absolutely. I kind of use that estimate too as a pretty good ballpark, especially because I find that the like multipliers for physical activity are very vague. And so sometimes it can almost be a little more precise to actually just look in terms of like, how many miles are you running? Let's make a big estimate for how many calories you're burning per mile and then tack that onto the RMR.
There's just not, like, a lot of these equations aren't, when those equations are thinking about like physical activity, they're not thinking about like ultra runners. They're not taking us into account. We are like the deviants.
For sure, in so many ways.
Yeah. So, I want to talk a little bit also about fueling during exercise. I was wondering, first, we haven't really talked a lot about your experience as like an ultra runner. I'd love to hear like what are your favorite types of events. I know you've done some unique stuff like the vertical kilometer, but before we, really talk about fueling during races, I'd like you to have the opportunity to share, like what your forte as a trail runner is, and how, how that affects like your fueling philosophy too.
Yeah, I'm into the short and steep. So I think in that way, like, we run in the same sport, but in very different ways. I really like the marathon distance, but I end up doing a lot of 50Ks because there's not as many trail marathons, which is a little bit of a bummer. But yeah, I'm really stoked. So my whole race calendar this year is uphill races, like shorter uphill races.
Nice.
Yeah, so we're kind of trying that out to see how things go. But yeah, I don't know. Like I've done like a variety of different things. I've done a couple of like 3-day stage races, which is really fun. I imagine like some similarities to like a 200, but with, the nice caveat of like you get to go home and sleep in a bed overnight the whole time, which is pretty fun. But yeah, so I guess I've done a little bit of everything as far as like shorter distances go. I like have definitely realized like I'm a lot more drawn to like just playing in the mountains. So that was part of why I wanted to kind of shift focus for this year and just do like shorter uphill races, VKs, basically so that I could have more time to just like go play in the mountains with my dogs and like just go do some like big kind of solo adventures.
For anyone listening, how many feet of vertical gain is a VK, and like could you describe that race format? Because it's not as popular in the US.
Yeah, there's only one true VK in the US. And this is really? Like the hill I will die on. Broken Arrow claims to have a VK and they do not.
Ooh, shots fired.
So a VK is 1 kilometer of elevation gain, which is like 3,400 feet, somewhere in that range, plus or minus. And to be a VK, it has to be completed in under 5 kilometers of distance. So the Rut up in Big Sky, Montana is the only true VK in the US that I know of. And yeah, it's about 3,400 feet and 2.9 miles. Broken Arrow is like 7.5 miles, so it doesn't quite make the cut. It's too runnable.
Okay. I didn't know that. I always thought that a VK could be completed as long as you completed, a vertical kilometer of vertical distance. I didn't think that the horizontal distance mattered at all.
Yeah, because the idea is basically it's supposed to be steep, and it's definitely like a much more popular format in Europe. And I say popular, it's very much not a popular format. Like there's still not a ton of races, but a lot of the European ones are even steeper. It'll be like 3. Like I think. I don't know how to pronounce it, but the VK in Foley, Switzerland, which is where Remy Bonnet just set the world record there this year. I think he did like 27 minutes, which is bonkers. But it's again that like kilometer of elevation gain in, I want to say it's like 2.5 kilometers of like total distance. So it's incredibly steep. That's why like if you watch videos of Remy like on his world record attempt, like everyone is wearing helmets because you could just fall off the mountain.
Oh man,
yeah, it's pretty wild. That's definitely like a short like couple of years goal for me, is to go do a VK in Europe and like actually experience like
there you
steep.
Go. That would be super cool, man. My least favorite routes are the ones where you need to wear like a helmet because of like the risk of rock fall. I like doing I like doing things in the mountains where I'm in full control of what happens to me and my own safety. But, I really don't like routes. I'm thinking of like the standard route up Sneffels where there's just a lot of loose rocks, 14er and the San Juans. And, you could just be perfectly fine on your own. But if someone up ahead of you kicks a rock down, like, that could be it. Some of those rocks are like refrigerator sized.
It's terrifying.
So that stuff is terrifying. Yeah. You're giving me flashbacks to that as you're talking about wearing a helmet going up a VK. But all right, gotta focus. I do want to talk to you about fueling during like these runs and these races. I know that this is a sentimental topic to you because you have a passion and a love for nerds, and I know that you definitely fuel with those while you're running your races. But I was wondering, like, how would you define your fueling philosophy for like long runs and for racing? And do you have any tips for people who are trying to dial that in?
Eat early, eat often. That is the philosophy. That is the tip. Other philosophy is that the rope is the superior candy shape for fueling. The nerds rope is better than the nerds clusters. I will die on that hill.
I almost said you were a lover of nerds clusters, so I'm so happy I didn't.
Nope, specifically the rope. Honestly, like it goes down so easy. I just found, because I have found they're like very difficult to find, and I just found like my like local Safeway had a bunch of them out in like the Valentine's Day candy display, and I grabbed a handful and bought them. Like, you gotta stock up when you have them. But
there
I'm a pretty big fan, like especially when we're talking ultras, like especially the longer ultras where you're going to be out there as long as you can. Like, I'm a pretty big fan of like, let's work on training your gut to basically find what your physiological limit is and then shoot for that. Because if you're out there for 24 hours, if you're out there for 5 freaking days, like, you pretty much need every opportunity to eat that you can get. And, fueling during a race, even if you are doing a shorter race, like it not only helps with your performance and your energy during that race, but it's going to help you recover and feel better afterwards. So like
that's a great point. I'm so happy you brought that up. I like was meaning to say that before. The more you eat while you're like doing a long run, like the less hungry you're going to be afterwards too. It's super helpful.
Yeah.
I fueled a lot better this year and in my lead up to like Western and Leadville and, or last year now, but just, I couldn't believe how much less hungry I was after these long runs because of, just the increased calorie intake while I was running.
Yeah. It goes a really long way. And like, I feel like I have athletes all the time who are like, oh, well, like, I'm like worried about taking that extra gel because, my run is done in 15 minutes and like, I'm not going to be able to use it at that point. And what we always talk about is like, worst case, your body uses that for recovery. Like, you're just sort of kickstarting that recovery process, even if you're not using it quite as much during your run now. So yeah, lots of benefits to fueling.
For me, when I think of like not fueling during longer runs, I think of growing up reading like Anton's blog, Riding the Wind, where he would just talk about long escapades in the mountains, shirtless, with no food, no water, and just the minimal lifestyle, running in minimal shoes that he like cut the soles off of, and it just was always super appealing to me because somebody you look up to goes in the mountains and doesn't fuel a lot, but then you grow up and you realize like there's this thing called like science, and the sport is getting faster and better for a reason. So this is a good transition, I think, into the question of what are your thoughts on the whole high carb philosophy that has been really, it's become much more popularized over the last, say, 12 to 18 months.
Dude, I'm here for it. I'm noticing a difference in, the way that my athletes approach fueling. Like, there are definitely still folks who, have those fears and, struggle to fuel. But I'm seeing a lot more of just this, like, desire to eat more because they're seeing that it works. I mean, we're seeing, like, ultra running, yes, we're seeing times get faster. And I think that's important. But also, like, ultra running in general is such a new sport where, like, there's so many ways where we can gain improvements. But I actually think what's really telling to just sort of point to like the success of high carb is actually looking at cycling and just seeing like how much faster like the Tour de France has gotten, and like theoretically, like they're doing less performance enhancing drugs and like, they're eating more carbs and like they're still getting faster. So I think I'm totally here for it. That said, I think there's nuance behind it, right? Like not everybody is going to be able to eat 150 grams of carbs an hour, and not everybody should be doing that. So, right. I think that's where working with a dietitian like me, or like, with yourself, like is a really good strategy for actually figuring out like, what is the right amount for you?
Yeah, like how can a 4'10", female ultrarunner be told to take in the same amount of grams of carbs per hour as like someone who's 6'5" and like a guy, for example? Your physiology is so different and your needs are so different. I think that like shooting for a specific number just because the elites do it or someone that you look up to does it, that doesn't mean that it's like the right answer.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a really good point too. Like, and I was thinking this when you were talking about Anton, and I hear that a lot now about Killian, right? Like, oh, well, Killian fueled with olive oil at UTMB. So like, does that mean that's what I should be doing? And like, nobody should compare themselves to Killian. Like nobody should do that because we have very different physiology. So yeah,
and genetics, of course. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely more nuanced than that. I think the other piece that, and I sent you this podcast episode on this a few weeks ago, but like looking at basically how much of the carbs that you're eating during exercise is your body actually able to break down and use for energy. And so, I think science is, still learning things there, but is really starting to like, get better understandings around like, okay, well, just because I can eat all of that food and I can tolerate it doesn't mean that my body is actually using that in the way that we want it to.
Right. I'll be honest, I still have to listen to that episode. I apologize.
No worries. It's a good listen, but yeah, my podcast listen list is like very, very long. So I get that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's a lot. On a similar note to fueling during exercise, one topic that I know you and I can both nerd out about a lot is hydration and electrolytes. And I'm sure you knew this was coming today at some point.
Oh, yeah.
In order to like dial that in, I was wondering, like, have you done a sweat test? Is that something you recommend to athletes, like outside of sweat testing? Like what are ways that like people can just be better on that subject?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I don't think that a sweat test is necessary for most people because kind of the background on the science of like hydration for, the listeners, because I know that we have geeked out about this and all of these things, but, basically the background is like so much of science has gone into figuring out how can we test your sweat. Well, like relatively little has gone into like, well, what do we do with this information once we have it? So we don't have super great guidelines on like, okay, well, if you're losing 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour, do you need to replace all of that? Do you need to be taking in 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour? And my kind of takeaway from like the research, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, but like takeaway from like research and practice is that kind of the best information we have is we want to be basically matching what goes in to what goes out. So like if you are losing 1,000 milligrams per liter of sweat, then we want to basically be taking in that amount.
Yes, so I agree with you. The goal is to try, keyword is try, to replace everything that we're losing. But physiologically speaking, it's very difficult for us to actually do that. If you go to a race like Badwater, which I was crewing over the summer, my runner was drinking like 2 liters of water an hour. But, there is a limit as to like how much you can actually ingest, how much you can ingest and how much you can ingest comfortably while you're competing in an event. I think that just like fueling, the highest of carb people, like David Roach, even he will tell you on his podcast that no matter how much he fuels during a race, at the end of the race, and the day after, he still has a calorie deficit. The goal with fueling is to reduce that deficit to as little as possible. And I kind of view hydration and electrolytes in the same manner. Most of the time, athletes can't comfortably ingest, 1+ liter of fluids while they're running an event on like an hourly basis. That's like 2 bottles an hour. At hour 1, that's easy. At hour 2, that's probably still easy. But, at hour 8, like that gets to be much more difficult. So the way I look at it is like if you take a sweat test and you know how much milligrams per liter, and a key word for a key differentiation for the audience is you measure your calories per hour and you measure your milligrams of sodium per liter.
Yep.
You measure that differently, right? But the way I see it is like, my sweat test, I'll just use me as an example just so I can throw some numbers out there. Like my number was 830 milligrams per liter. So, you reabsorb like 5 to 10% of that. Heat training can help with that too. But my philosophy when I'm running a race, and this worked very well for me this year, so I feel very confident recommending it, is, if there's a certain ratio you're losing, try your best to take in that ratio. Just because you're not replacing 100% of what you're losing both on the fluid and the electrolyte side doesn't mean that, it's bad. You just want to, your whole body works off ratios. I mean, I'm sure you know this, like in your gut, when it comes to hydration and electrolytes, when it comes to like fueling, when you're taking a gel, it's important to have water with it. There's a lot of science. Yeah, I could talk about that whole science process for like an hour too. But my thoughts are just like replace as much as you can, but like the ratio is still important, even if we're not exactly matching what we lost.
Yeah, that's exactly my approach too, because of exactly what you said. Like I have an athlete who loses, gosh, I hope she doesn't listen to this and get mad at me for getting her numbers wrong, but I want to say like her sweat tests pretty consistently show she's losing like 2,000 milligrams per liter and like 2 liters per hour. Like and this is like, 5'3" woman, like she is big sweaty. And so, yeah, we have that conversation a lot where we're like, you're not going to be able to replace all of this. So let's maintain the concentration so that all of the fluid balance in your body kind of is where it needs to be. And, it's kind of, it's damage mitigation, right? Like that's kind of all of it is. But yeah, so all of that to say, like, I think a sweat test can give you a good kind of starting point, but, ultimately, like I've worked with a number of athletes who, we can kind of get to that point through some trial and error anyway. For me personally, I have an H drop, which is like a reusable wearable sweat test. And mostly I got it because I think it's cool more than anything. But it's, like my numbers are pretty consistent from run to run. Like, my sodium concentration doesn't change a ton. Like it's pretty easy to kind of estimate those things. What I do think most runners could benefit from is sweat rate testing. Which is, something that you can do at home with a scale if you're, comfortable with weighing yourself. And basically the strategy is you weigh yourself naked after peeing, before and after going for a run. If you drink anything during the run, you have to kind of add that back in. And if you pee during the run, you have to measure it. So I just recommend do it on a run where you don't have to worry about that. And basically you can look at the amount of weight that you lost and convert that into liters. And you can figure out your hourly sweat rate doing that. Home scales kind of vary in their accuracy. So like do a few tests in order to, kind of figure out like an average. But then once you know your sweat rate and you can kind of target that, then you can sort of play with the sodium concentration and try to find, what makes you feel best. So what's
so hard about that though is how much sweat you lose on like a 50-degree day is going to be so different than like a 100-degree day. So I actually tried doing this last year, and I did it like 2 or 3 times in my lead up to Western, but I'm super data driven, man, but like even that was too much for me. It's so hard to really like figure out those numbers because it changes with every run.
Totally, yeah, and you have to like collect that data on like, okay, well, I know what my sweat rate is on a 50-degree day versus a 100-degree day, and then you're kind of making estimates of like, okay, when I start my race, it's going to be 40 degrees, but when it gets hot, it's going to be 90 degrees.
And what's your sweat rate when you throw ice in your bandana and your arm sleeves and your bucket hat at Western? I imagine that affects sweat rate too.
Yep. So I think, it's data-informed practice is, probably how I would approach everything. Like we can use the data to give us a starting point, but at the end of the day, like go practice. Like go see what works for you. And, and I think what's huge in ultra running is like, go out and have the experience of getting a little bit hyponatremic. Like go out and have the experience of getting dehydrated so that you know what it feels like and how you can adjust when like that inevitably happens to you in the middle of your race.
Do that very safely, folks.
Yes, I am not recommending that you intentionally go out and like seek hyponatremia. But
I think what you're recommending is like when the more races you run, the more mistakes inevitably you're going to make. And those mistakes are really what teach you how to keep your hydration and electrolytes and fueling standards in, I guess, on the right path, right? Like when I was, a great story, I tell this a lot, is when I ran the Zion 100 in like 2022, I had like way too much salt in the morning, and I ended up, after the race was over, I went in to talk to my grad school professors about it, and they were like, it sounds like you had too much sodium, and what happens is your gut works off osmotic pressure, it pulls in water, you felt bloated. That explained why my race was a disaster. And because of that experience, I had a few 100-milers where I was afraid to have too much sodium, and so I ended up hyponatremic. And I was like, man, I'm still like feeling bad, but I'm not having an overwhelming amount of salt. And then I took the sweat test, and I was like, okay, like first I had too much sodium, and then I had too little, and like now I'm like finally in the right place and like maintaining that adequate ratio. So, you don't need a sweat test, but, trial and error can go a long way in like helping you dial those things in.
Yeah, and
it is frustrating how like hypo and hypernatremia also feel very similar. Like a lot of the symptoms are the same. So you also, I would say, a good way to figure out if you're doing things properly is, just monitoring your pee status, your urination.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, one of the best ways that we can gauge hydration status. I think your situation is like a primo example of like when I would recommend a sweat test. Like if you're somebody who like has struggled with hydration, that's a really good direction to go in. If you're just, and I mean, you can always get one if you're interested in data, but yeah, I know they can be a little bit pricey.
So I go through Dina Griffin, another RD. I'm not sure if you know Dina. For anyone listening, if you want a sweat test and you live in the Boulder, Colorado area, just contact me. I could get you in contact with Dina, or tell Dina, and she gives me a little bonus. So I appreciate that. But also, I don't want to take that away from you. Elisa, you might offer it on your own, it sounds like.
Nope. I send a lot of my athletes. Gatorade makes these like single-use sweat patches that they're not as precise as some of the other tests. Like it gives you a range. It might say, oh, you lose between 15 and 32 ounces per hour, and then it gives you sodium concentration too. But that can be a really like affordable kind of like first step. And what I've found is like my H-drop data is pretty consistent with what I've gotten on the Gatorade patches too. You can get like 4 of them for $25. So that's not a bad way. Yeah.
Yeah, because the sweat testing machines, the reason I don't do it myself is like those machines are like $8,000 or something like that, or $10,000. I don't remember the number. So that's why I refer people out instead of doing it on my own. But that is really good to know. And I apologize. I didn't want to take your thunder away too.
No, you're good. You're good.
I feel like there's a lot of great like practitioners and coaches out here. Like I don't like take it personally when people go to me or you or someone else. Like there's enough love to go around for all of us to be successful, I think.
We live in a good place for this kind of stuff, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's wrap up the convo on hydration and electrolytes. I got a few more things to chat with you about.
Cool.
One of them is, as a male dietitian, there's just some life experiences, we'll call them, that like I will never experience as a man. Hopefully, I will never menstruate. But as coming from a male dietitian perspective, like I don't have that experience of going through menopause or menstruating. But you, as a female dietitian, you do firsthand, and you probably work with a lot of athletes who are going to ask you questions about that. Even as a male dietitian, I have people, athletes who are asking me about that too. But yeah, I was wondering what like your perspective is as like a female dietitian. Like, could you discuss some of the like different recommendations that you would make for like a female athlete versus a male athlete with like those two topics in mind?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think I feel like for the last like decade or so, there's been this like ongoing conversation in the sports science world of like, do women's and men's physiologies work the same? Like, do women need to train differently? Do we need to, cycle sync or, anything like that? And it's interesting. Like, I think, and I want to acknowledge that it's definitely an area that needs a lot more research. There was a really cool paper that got published a couple years ago And I feel like the absolute worst person in the world because I don't remember the first author, but I know one of the authors was Alyssa Lieb. Anyway, really interesting study that looked at sports science research over the last, however many decades, and basically tried to figure out how many of the published studies, A, focused exclusively on women, and B, included women in their research at all. And it was like a really staggering number. It was like only like 6% of published studies in sports science were about women, like focused on women's physiology. And so it's one of those, like, maybe there are differences, but like the current very limited evidence we have kind of shows that like we don't necessarily need to worry about training or fueling differently. That said, I think that there are some kind of like unique factors to like female metabolism that are worth talking about. So one of them, you mentioned menstruation. I appreciate you being able to say that word with a straight face because a lot of males are not able to do that, which is a sad sign of the times. But
yeah, people are weird. I don't get why it's a big deal, but
yeah,
okay.
It's just as natural of a bodily function as pooping. So, which we're all happy to talk about.
I can't say that without a straight face, or with a straight face.
Me neither. I'm a 12-year-old boy. It's okay. So the menstrual cycle is, like from personal experience, very annoying, but can also be a really useful tool in gauging a lot of the things that we've talked about today. So when we think about adequate energy intake, the menstrual cycle can be a really useful vital sign to basically help us gauge, are we eating enough? So in the athlete population, something called hypothalamic amenorrhea is really common. So hypothalamic, meaning it's driven by the hypothalamus, which is an organ in our body that controls a lot of our kind of like metabolic functions. And then amenorrhea is loss of menstrual cycle. So basically any kind of disruption that happens to our menstrual cycle is a sign that something is up in our body, and is, in my opinion, that is a red flag that you are not eating enough. Is that always the case? No, there are a number of other things that can impact the menstrual cycle. So PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is another really big one that can often be kind of like misdiagnosed as amenorrhea or like as hypothalamic amenorrhea, because it can cause your period to do wonky things, including to basically disappear. So that's definitely something that, we want to make sure that we're kind of ruling out when we're looking through all of this and going down this path. The other kind of like thing to consider with all of this is that hormonal birth control basically makes your period not a reliable source of information. So a lot of people don't know this, but when you take a birth control pill or when you have a hormonal IUD, you generally will have a period, which I say in air quotes because it's not actually a true period. It's what's known as withdrawal bleeding. And basically, like having that withdrawal bleed once a month is not an indicator that your menstrual cycle is normal. So basically all of that to say, like, unfortunately, if you are on hormonal birth control, your menstrual cycle is just not a reliable indicator of your energy intake. But if you are not on hormonal birth control and you start to notice that your period is late, your cycles start to get longer, you're skipping cycles entirely, like those are huge red flags that you might want to look into. Okay, am I eating enough? Are there other things? And one thing I'll kind of add to that, without this turning into like a whole like 80-minute long conversation about red specifically, is like by the time you lose your period, your body is screaming at you to eat. That is one of those processes that your body will start to shut down when you're not eating enough. But typically, like, your body will try to maintain that as long as possible, because like if we think about, what's considered an essential body process, like we were talking about earlier, human beings kind of exist evolutionarily to reproduce. And so maintaining reproduction for as long as we can is a like top priority of the body. So when you start to lose that ability, that's a sign that like you're in deep, and I say that just because by the time you reach that point, there are probably other signals that you may have missed. So things that we had talked about earlier, maybe your resting heart rate has gotten lower, you notice you're cold all the time, your hair starts falling out, you're tired, you're not recovering well from workouts, those kinds of things. So I think that's a really like interesting and like unique thing that women have that men don't, is this kind of like identifying factor of like, okay, we're probably not eating enough.
I have never heard it phrased that way, where like reproduction is, that is basically why we're alive. That's what evolution has created us to do. And I've never heard somebody talk about it in the sense of like, if you're losing like what you were created to do, like that's a really big red flag. So I really appreciate that thorough answer. That was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to talk about this stuff because, I think that the like cultural mindset on this is starting to shift. But I know certainly when I was an athlete in high school, like it was kind of viewed as like, oh, you lost your period. Like that's just normal. That's because you're an athlete. And that is very much not true.
I feel like in high school, even as a guy, you hear like, oh, sometimes like women who exercise a lot lose their period. And it was said in a fashion that was like normalized. It's like, oh, okay, that's just like normal.
Yeah.
I mean, there was this person's probably not going to listen to this podcast, but there was someone in my high school who was, she was a really great track runner. She lost her period and thought that like, oh, this is just because I work out a lot. Turns out, 8 months later, she's pregnant, and found out like right at the end. So just kind of a wild story, but
interesting.
It just is a good example, I think, an anecdote that shows like, oh, that was normalized so much that someone thought they lost their period for almost a year and they thought that it was normal.
Yeah, and then she ended up being pregnant.
That happens
That's wild.
Yeah, most people, they're not pregnant when that's the case, but, it's a lot of people will, I think, female athletes will lose their period and they'll say, oh, this just happens to us. But, I appreciate your response, like I said before, and it's not supposed to, it's not supposed to happen to us. We can prevent it.
Yeah.
And nutrition is a big part of that.
Exactly. I think the other kind of like female specific thing to mention is menopause. I work with a number of perimenopausal or menopausal women, and we like one of the big things that we end up talking about is the changes that happen to our body when we lose estrogen. So estrogen, the female sex hormone, is actually like wildly protective of heart health, of bone health. And so I see, more in athletes, I see a lot of the kind of like bone health side of things that like when you're going into menopause, you need to be really extra cautious that you are supporting your bones through all of the things we've, already talked about today. Because when you lose estrogen, you lose that protective factor. So bone health just becomes like all the more important, and that's why we see like grandmas with broken hips and, osteoporosis and those sorts of things. So that's a really important like life transition to keep in mind if you are an athlete, that you need to just give your bones an extra, a little bit of TLC when you're going through that transition.
Yeah, this has been great. I know we're over an hour now. I do have a few more questions I want to ask you, just to be respectful of your time, though. One of the things I want to chat about briefly, because I know it's important to you, is public health. And one of the things that happened recently, I'm sure you are aware, and to be very clear, this is not a political podcast. We're not going to talk about either side of that spectrum. But there was the reason I bring this up is because there was a new food pyramid that was released by the USDA. And for anyone who has not seen it and who is listening, I guess the best way to describe it is they like took the food pyramid that most of us are familiar with from like grade school, and they like, for whatever reason, they flipped it upside down, which I personally think is kind of stupid and misleading. But they literally flipped it upside down, so now like the pointy part of the pyramid that would be on top is now on the bottom.
Which means
and basically
nothing.
Yeah,
what
I don't know what was the purpose of that. So basically they put like meat with red meat as the cornerstone, which, I have thoughts on that, but I want to hear yours. They put like meat, dairy, and veggies on top. They put basically like fruit in the middle and grains on like the bottom, and they made if you look at the new pyramid, there's no like sides to it. There's just like the top. If you look at it, there's just a line on the top that's like really long, and then as the pyramid comes to a point at the bottom, they put one more line on the bottom to put carbohydrates and grains in like their own category, basically to tell people to like not eat grains, which from an endurance athlete perspective I think is wildly inaccurate. And this has nothing to do with politics. This is all my opinion is 100% like science based from grad school and being a dietitian, but I'm interested in hearing what your perspective on the new food pyramid is, and should people just like ignore this or and listen to like professionals, like individual professionals like us? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
I think the biggest thing that I keep reminding myself is that, we know from past research that less than 10% of Americans follow the dietary guidelines anyway. So
that's a good point.
I kind of feel like ignoring it is, just sort of status quo and like probably not a bad idea. There are things in the new dietary guidelines that I don't hate. I don't hate.
It's not all bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I don't hate the idea. I mean, we should be prioritizing vegetables. Vegetables are great for us. Fiber is a superfood. Like that's awesome. I don't hate what they, their kind of take on like, minimizing processed foods. I think as an athlete, we, definitely have much more room for processed foods in our diet. And if we, truly have high energy needs, I think it's very difficult to meet those needs without including some amount of processed foods, and then certainly like you can pry my nerds ropes out of my cold, dead hands. But, so I think that there's some benefits to it. If you actually read the like whole, like document and like look beyond just the pyramid, like they haven't changed that much, right? Like the pyramid, I think it's the inconsistencies that are challenging, right? Because the pyramid would have you believe that like all like the main staple of your diet should be red meat, cheese, and butter and beef tallow. But then like, when you actually like read through the document, it still says limit saturated fats to less than 10% of your calories, which was the previous recommendation. And so like those two things don't really work because you can't eat foods that are high in saturated fat, but eat less than like 20 grams a day.
Eat less.
Doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, so I use the athlete's plate with a lot of my athletes. So for anyone who doesn't know, the athlete's performance plates are a tool developed by the U.S. Olympic Committee that basically took the previous dietary guidelines, a tool called My Plate, and sort of extended it to meet the needs of athletes. And I will continue to use that. These new dietary guidelines will not change that for me because I think it is just such a useful tool, just to be able to kind of visualize proportions of different food groups on your plate based on what your training looks like. So, I think for me, like the dietary guidelines don't change anything in how I'm going to practice.
Yeah, and I think maybe the way I phrased that question is like it almost comes across my opinion is, oh, this is 100% wrong. It's not 100% wrong. Like there's a lot of great aspects to it, like you were talking about. We should be eating vegetables. We should be eating a lot of fruit. We should be getting, especially as athletes, a lot of protein, which is a whole subject we didn't touch on today. But there's nutrition's such a big field. We can't possibly hit everything in 1 hour-ish long podcast. But I think from like an athletic standpoint, I saw that and I was like, man, like this. I've been joking that Big Bread didn't pay enough to the USDA for to be recommended, but as endurance athletes, like we need carbs, and even diabetics are recommended to get 45 to 65% of their energy intake from carbohydrate. The key thing with diabetes, for example, is like maintaining consistency of carbohydrate intake over the course of your day, not 100% eliminating carbs or being afraid of them. But yeah, from like an athletic standpoint, I'm like, this is not a good, if an athlete looks at this and sees, grains on as like a not recommended food, I think that's concerning. But, like you said, it is hopeful that most people won't even pay attention to it.
Yeah, I've brought it up in a couple of client sessions since the dietary guidelines got released, and it's been like in the context of like, we're talking about something related to it, and pretty much everybody I've talked to has been like, oh, I didn't know there were new dietary guidelines. So, I guess that's helpful at least.
That's funny. I asked like somebody last night in a session if he had seen the new guidelines, and he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I was like, okay. That's maybe this is good actually.
Yeah. We can and I think what I'm concerned about, and again, without this turning into like an overtly political thing, but like the dietary guidelines ultimately are what a lot of government food programs use. So what are going to be the impacts of these new dietary guidelines on school nutrition programs and those sorts of things. But yeah, that can be a conversation for another day.
Yeah, I'll be honest, as a dietitian, it's such a big field, and everyone I meet, and I'm sure that you meet, wants to ask you a question about, like, what are your thoughts on this niche nutrition subject? And it's hard to, like, know the science behind every single one. Yeah, one of my, like, weaknesses, I would say, is, like, public health nutrition. I don't know a lot about, like, how the food pyramid is going to impact, like, SNAP or WIC or other, government programs like that, but it doesn't surprise me that it will.
Yeah. So it's I don't know. It's an interesting thing, but yeah, I think, that's where like our role as dietitians, just becomes even more important to like help, be like, we were talking a little before we started recording just about, like sort of not like trustworthiness, but you used a really good word, just, around like having, professionals who you can actually trust. And so I think that's where, we can really play an important role in all of this, especially working with like such a unique population as athletes.
Yes. Well, before we wrap things up, there's one looming subject I had to bring up today. And this question was actually brought up by a mutual acquaintance of ours, I would hope you know, a guy named Garrett. You might know. Just maybe know. We were logging some Burrito League loops together, and he told me that, when I told him I was having you on the podcast, he was like, oh, you got to ask her about the Burrito League because she loves talking about it. So I got to know, like, what are your thoughts on the Burrito League and everything that's been going on lately in the sport of ultrarunning?
Oh, this is unreal. As context, Garrett is my partner who met Stefan because they bumped into each other doing laps on the Boulder Burrito League, and apparently have like become buddies now. So this is really fun. I've been just giving Garrett a lot of crap because he like basically it's all he's talked about for the last 2 weeks. And nice. We had to have a little chat where I was like, hey, can we talk about literally anything else? But no, the Burrito League is kind of fun. I actually did my first laps on the Burrito League last night. Figured I needed to check it out before it all totally goes away. So yeah, I'm somewhere on the leaderboard. I got 19 laps. I think I'm 40th out of 60. So definitely not going to win. But it was an interesting experience. I don't know. It sounds like I may have gone at the wrong time because there were not very many other people out running. But it sounds like if I had been when you were there like 2 hours earlier, it might have been a little better vibes.
Yeah, we had a good group. There's the same 5 to 10 people that just keep showing up. Hopefully I can keep you on the burrito subject for just a minute. I had a few more very important questions for you, actually, on the subject of burritos.
Incredible.
I was wondering, is a burrito a sandwich?
Ooh. Okay. This kind of falls into like the sandwich or hot dog debate, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I would say not a sandwich because sandwich requires that there's bread on 2 sides and a burrito has bread on 4 sides.
Okay, interesting. That's a good one. I've been listening to, I really have been enjoying the podcast called Chase and Trail. I don't know if you've heard of it. Mm-mm. It's like a satirical ultra running podcast. And the host, he had on this guy from like, I think it was like Massachusetts, and he was like the hot dog man or something. And he was talking about like hot dogs and ultra running. And when asked if a hot dog was a sandwich, he said, well, why can't a hot dog just be a hot dog and a sandwich be a sandwich? And so I saw someone ask, like, is a burrito a sandwich the other day? And I was like, well, maybe a burrito is just a burrito.
This is very philosophical. No, I mean, I can see the argument where, like, sandwich is 2 sides bread, hot dog is 3 sides bread, and burrito is 4 sides bread. And so then because of that, everything would fall into one of those 3 categories.
Wow. We're really putting this together. Socrates would be proud.
Yeah, tell that to my philosophy 101 professor from undergrad.
Nice. Oh, man. I've tried to read Plato's Republic like 5 times, and I keep failing because it's so complicated.
Oh, I hated that class.
One of these days. I tried to listen to the Republic while I was hiking on the Colorado Trail because I thought I'd become like more enlightened, but I just like I didn't have the attention span to like because their arguments are like one question leads to another question leads to another question to another, and like if you don't follow the chain down and then like work your way back up, like it's so hard to follow their logic. But that's a whole other subject.
My brain doesn't.
I have one more burrito question for you.
Incredible.
As a dietitian, do you prefer Chipotle, Illegal Pete's, or another place to get your burritos?
Ooh. Okay. Hear me out. So this was probably like more than 10 years ago at this point, but I had a layover in the Salt Lake City airport, and I went to, oh, what is it called? It's another like fast casual burrito place that they do have in the Denver area. And I don't remember what it was called, but they had the most incredible breakfast burrito that I have ever eaten in my entire life. And then when I moved to Denver a couple years later, I was excited to find that like this burrito place exists here. And then I learned that they only have breakfast burritos in their airport locations.
Oh,
so
that's weird.
Yeah, I was really bummed about it because that was, and like I never tried one of their like daytime burritos, but the breakfast burrito, I still have dreams about it. So I don't remember what it's called, but if anyone goes to the Salt Lake airport and has a phenomenal breakfast burrito, let me know.
Okay, airport breakfast burritos for the win. Okay. Well, I do have another last question actually on the burrito thing. I know you're an anti-diet dietitian, but if I were to go on an all burrito diet because of the Burrito League, like, would you be against that?
I think a burrito, actually, it's like kind of embarrassing how many conversations I've had with my clients about burritos being like nutritionally complete. But no, I think you could definitely meet your needs on an all burrito diet, especially if you had a little bit of like variety in what types of burritos you ate. But like, so thinking to the performance plates, the performance plate is a combination of carbs, protein, and fruits and vegetables. So all burritos are going to be wrapped in a tortilla. There's your carb. Maybe there's rice in there, so you get some extra carbs. You might want to do that on a hard training day. You're going to have, your chicken or your carnitas or your beans or whatever, your tofu as your protein option. And then, whatever kinds of vegetables, whether it's the lettuce or the chipotle veggies or the corn salsa or the regular salsa. Salsa is a vegetable, by the way. So yeah, no, I think definitely yes. All burrito diet, you're meeting your needs for sure.
Awesome. I love it. I totally agree. It's also the best, the best post long run food. And in Colorado, any mountain town, you can find a good burrito basically. And by good, I mean anything that has calories and protein in it when you're done with a 25-miler in the mountains tastes magical. So
yeah. What's your go-to burrito, Stefan?
Dude, I would love to say Pancho's in Buena Vista, but they fucking closed, and I'm heartbroken. After realizing that they closed like a year ago, I realized that maybe I took my life in the wrong direction by going to grad school for nutrition. I realized that maybe I should have taken that savings and just bought Pancho's in Buena Vista and like slept in like the back or something because they had my favorite burritos ever. But I guess now my answer is illegal Pete's.
Okay. Not too late to change your career path, but yeah, may have to hunt down the old owners to get their secret recipes.
So disappointing. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the burritos were average. They were just like above average when you were like done with a long day in the mountains. And, I recommended their burritos to some people on the Colorado Trail, and they packed out like 5 of them or something, and they made my trail name Pancho's because of that.
Incredible.
They're the only 2 people who have ever called me Pancho, because I hopped off trail after that. But good times.
Incredible.
Oh, man. Well, Elisa, I want to commend you for being a great preceptor. Back in the day, it's time flies. That was like 2 years ago now. 2+ years. Yep. Time's flying.
We're old.
A while ago. For standing up for, I see you on social media, you stand up for a lot of the values and things you find important to you, and I think that you're a really good influence on the community, the ultrarunning community, the online community, whatever you want to call that. But I just think that overall you're putting out like useful, practical advice that is making the world a better and a healthier place. So I just wanted to commend you for that. The last question that before, I do want to give you an opportunity also to remind people like where they can learn more about you and your business. But the last question with sustenance per se is what is because this is the Journey Running podcast, what is a journey you've been on in your life, whether that's a journey run, a race, or a life event that is important to you, and what did that journey teach you?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I think honestly we've talked a lot about my journey. Like I think it was just sort of my journey of like overcoming an eating disorder that, you know, contributed to that bone stress injury because not eating enough. And, you know, being able to, honestly, this sounds super lame and corporate, but like being able to kind of tie that into like a super meaningful, like values-based career that I have landed in, that if you had asked me, you know, when I was in college, if this was a career path I thought was like even remotely feasible, I would have said absolutely not. Yeah, I think that's probably been like the meaningful journey to share today.
Awesome. I love it. And I do want to make sure that, being that this is your career, I want to make sure that people can find you and follow you on, you know, both your ultra running adventures and your, you know, dietary, your recommendations as a dietitian. So, you know, where's the best place for people to give you a follow? Is it Instagram? Is it, yeah, I don't know, like where's the best place for people to follow you? What's your website if people want to reach out to you? Yeah. And then also, like, what are your 2026 goals for people that people can look forward to tuning into?
Oh, rad. That's a good addition to that question. Yeah, probably best place to find me is Instagram. I'm not posting quite as much anymore, but I'm there. So, you know, shoot me a message. Like, I promise you I will see it. I'm at Elisa _RD. And then, yeah, as you'll see in all of the, like, show notes and stuff, Elisa is spelled wrong. So, yeah. And then website is peak2peaknutrition.com. There's also a contact form on there that goes straight into my email inbox. So you can definitely feel free to reach out there. 2026 wise, you know, I think you've got a lot of uphill running to be looking forward to and a lot of dog adventures. I have 2 border collies. So yeah, you can definitely be on the lookout for them. They always make an appearance. I'm like shocked they haven't made an appearance while we've been talking today.
Yeah, right. They did right before we got started, but not since then.
Yeah, they quieted down. But actually kind of nice.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Journey Running podcast, Elisa. It was really great having you. And yeah, I can't wait to hopefully do this again in the future.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks, Stefan. This is awesome.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode. I hope you were able to come away with valuable information that can help you run farther, feel smarter, and develop character through trail and ultra running. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the show. I would really appreciate it. Also, if you or anyone you know is looking for a registered dietitian or a coach to help you crush your running goals in 2026, you can reach out to me at journeyruncoaching.com or directly via my email, which is journeyrunningllc@gmail.com. Thank you so much again for taking the time to listen today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.